welcome. Welcome Elizabeth Lowe to the interview. Thank you so much for
Thanks.
joining me today. So
Thanks
for
for
those who
having
don't
me.
for those who don't know, Elizabeth Lowe is a short filmmaker slash documentarian, um, and she's created such critically acclaimed, I would like to say, as Hotel 22. Now, I just want to. So, how I first got to know you was through actually a university course, and one of
Mm.
the subjects was on documentary filmmaking, etc. And one of our pieces we had to study was your Hotel 22.
Oh,
So, I
wow.
was just wanting to gauge sort of your reaction on this. Is that your work is being studied in university? I was just wanting to. Because I know that you made that film during university, and for was it a project or was it
It
for.
was a graduate. I was in a graduate program at Stanford,
Yep.
one of the projects that we had made. Yeah, it's been really exciting to find professors and students come to me saying that they've come across my work in the classroom context. It's interesting because I made it as a student, and it's interesting how this piece has resonated with people. You never know which of your films um, will be appreciated. And I think it's the formal qualities of it that maybe are uh, easy to digest or analyze, are maybe what makes it good for classroom context.
Yeah. It's.
But it's exciting to be taught and to be able to interact with younger filmmakers. Yeah.
And so you obviously knew about, so how especially when your the Hotel 22 hit much more success, I would like to say, how
Mhm.
much did universities immediately reach out to you and say, oh, did they reach out and say, how can we use this content, or did students or professors
Yeah.
or just say, oh, we're studying your thing, what do you take on this?
No, it's over time. I think it was released, Hotel 22 was kind of like released in 2015. And over the last few years, uh, slowly it seemed like teachers or professors were discovering it, probably on New York Times op docs or different online platforms that it was on. And then later on, Video Project, which is a distribution company, they came to me to package all my short films into a DVD that would be distributed and sold to different educational institutions. So maybe that's part of why. And I know that some writers had decided to put some writers of a textbook, of a documentary textbook, had decided to include Hotel 22 as like a sample of observational filmmaking. I haven't actually read it, so maybe that's why. But yeah, it's funny how Hotel 22 has kind of gone kind of like viral in this like mini academic way, and I'm not sure why exactly. Maybe you could tell me.
Well,
Or what are they teaching it as using it as a tool for? To
For
teach
example,
observation?
we when I was doing it was through the looking at the different modes of how documentaries can be filmed, and for example, looking at your one in a very observational, where
Mm-hmm.
there is no sort of connection between you and the actions taking place in the actual film, and uses like this
Yeah.
is a very raw observational documentary, where there's very minimal music used, very minimal shot changes, especially during the scenes, and just trying to be more, I guess, yeah, was it objective or observational? I can't remember which one.
Observational. Yeah, I remember when in school when I had decided to make this, it was like the third film that we were making,
Mm.
and the first two films I made were not like this, even though they were slowly progressing towards that form. But I remember setting out rules for myself before going, and even like the topic itself is sort of reflection of the kind of story I wanted to tell. Like I purposely chose this bus because I knew that the story of the bus and its inhabitants could be shown filmically without voiceover or interview, things that we I had relied on before, and I wanted to challenge myself to not do that. And in terms of like the shots being static or whatever you were saying, I remember I had rules and like aesthetic rules for myself, like no rack focus. These are just like
Mm.
taste things too, um, that I had set out when I was filming and kind of implemented them as I wrote on the bus.
Okay. And you mentioned, well, obviously a lot of people found out, especially through Hotel 22, is through the New York Times op doc. So how did that come into fruition with the op docs?
So it got into Sundance, and OpDocs picks 3 films out of the short film slate at Sundance to premiere online at the same time. And I remember being excited about the opportunity to be on a platform that's not a film festival context that would be seen by non-film people, like at the New York Times. And a really interesting sort of byproduct that happened out of it that I never predicted was that the Silicon Valley, some animal, sorry, not animal rights, it's another issue I really care a lot about.
That's so good.
Homelessness advocates saw the film, and then also a community foundation saw the film, and they organized a screening where I would be on a panel with a homelessness advocate and also the bus company. And so it became this catalyst. The screening event became a catalyst to bring together unlikely people on different sides of this issue, with my film being sort of like the vehicle or the excuse to join together. And the homelessness advocate ended up working with the bus company, or being able to pressure maybe the bus company to set aside like $250,000 to send a caseworker onto the bus at night and house as many people as they could. And so that's kind of like, that would have only happened in a non-film context, I think, because it was seen by activists who work in a social medium.
So,
just appreciating it.
So would you connect yourself essentially through Hotel 22 as a portion of, I guess, social change to the actual Silicon Valley in terms of how they treat homeless, especially how those you said they use your film almost as a way to get the bus companies to have
interaction, at least interface. I mean, the bulk of I think most of the work is done by the real activists and the people who have dedicated their lives to this cause and work day and night for this cause. I think the film played a very small step in a very small, probably a small solution in a much larger issue that can't be fixed overnight. But yeah, it was a really interesting experience to me, because for me, the film was, like I had been saying, it was almost, I've always been interested in issues of inequality, and looking at society and examining the way classes and races clash. But for me, it was also I just wanted to make a film about this. It wasn't to change the world. And so to have the film be used by other people who can actually implement it in an effective way, that was really, I was really grateful for that experience. But I wouldn't say the film is, changing the world.
But for example, I live in Australia. I would have never known about this line 22. Never would have ever known. And then, but by doing that, I now consider certain things what I see in my own sort of city and my own different experiences, where you go, oh, this is what's happening where I am as well. So I think maybe you're selling yourself just a little bit too short in terms of not necessarily, yes, maybe this specific instance, but people who, especially through having like the op-docs and distribution methods from education, it sort of has had a much larger impact with different people and how they now reinterpret things.
Wow, that's really, really cool to hear. That's actually one of the most exciting things I've heard about that kind of impact, because that's how film or literature changes me also. Like when I read something, a piece of literature, or watch a film, it changes the way I see the world. And to hear that it changed the way even you perceive things in Australia, that's like really rewarding.
Oh, well,
thank you for telling me that.
No problem.
Well, yeah, I think when I make films, I don't expect social change or concrete change, but I do want to create a mental shift in the same way that powerful films have created mental shifts in me and how I view the world. Yeah.
Wow, that's very sort of, I want to say humble in terms of you're saying. It's because a lot of people, when they create something, it's like, I want to change the world. A lot of people get into filmmaking, especially like people who I've done courses with, they want to come into filmmaking to change the world. But you're sort of coming into a more, from how you're saying, is like, if I could change one person's mindset, you want to change necessarily, would you say it'd be a success if you change someone's mindset? rather
Yeah,
than.
I mean, because like, that's how I feel like my worldview has been shaped. It's by little bits and pieces of literature, art, and film changing slowly, or like helping me understand the world in a more accurate or nuanced way. And I always wonder, like, how did I develop my worldview growing up in Hong Kong?
Mm.
Um, and I think it's through art.
So, just touching on Hong Kong, so how much would you connect your sort of growing up in Hong Kong to your filmmaking of in terms of inspirations or dedication or techniques, or was it sort of like, I guess, a sort of smaller, like the culture around it? Would you connect anything that from growing up in Hong Kong to how you've now connected it to your filmmaking?
Um, it's interesting. I would say that growing up in Hong Kong, I was always, and I was always very cognizant of inequality. And this is a city that is deeply unequal.
Mm.
And I think I was very sensitized to it, and I'm not exactly sure why. Um, but yeah, and I think it's probably affected me. And also, I went to school, and I remember one of the courses being how education can change you when you're in a place where you're impressionable. Uh, I think a lot of what we studied, like in terms of colonialism uh, around the world, and those kinds of things really shaped my worldview. And that was like freshman year in high school. And that was taught in the school that I was attending at the time in Hong Kong, and it taught colonialism in this global context. And so it allowed me to understand the dynamics of inequality on a global level and then also within a society. And I think like if I had grown up in America, I may not have had the same education or so yeah, many things probably
Okay,
the
that's
affect the way I do things, yeah.
that's interesting. And so you mentioned before, it's sort of, do you find a sort of, especially studying film and whatnot, especially, is there is a sort of like there's film community and then there's the public audience, and there's a very hard, especially if you're doing short films and a very
Mm-hmm.
specific genre of
Mm-hmm.
filmmaking, where it can be critically acclaimed in one specific thing and become distributed very widely in that thing, but it's very hard to connect yourself to a larger audience. Sort of like
Mm-hmm.
a, do you, so obviously with the New York Times op docs,
Mm-hmm.
was there any other ways that you try and ventured out and try and connected with the general audience, or found tactics on how to actually connect through content, through distribution methods, or any other methods to try and connect with a larger audience?
um I'm trying to think.
That's okay.
Mostly I kind of allowed people to reach out to me to if they were interested in hosting a community screening, which people were, and then I would just allow them to and send them the file. I don't think I personally sort of put too much effort in
Yeah, no, I
in
get that.
trying. I mean, I think at one point I remember being really happy because it had risen up. My friends who are Redditors,
Yeah.
it had risen up to like one of the front pages of Reddit.
Hmm.
Uh, and then so Redditors would watch it, Hotel 22. Um, and that made me really happy, but it all kind of happened organically. Like I tried to do that with another short film I made. I was like, oh, I would love for it to like rise up in the ranks of Reddit so that people will watch it if it appears on the front page. But it just didn't happen because you can't force it. Like it's just some films resonate and some
Hmm.
films don't in that way. So I think a lot of the way that Hotel 22 has gotten out there into the public space has been organically.
And
And
so go on with what we were gonna say.
yeah, I don't know how much you can control that. I mean, I'm sure you can, but I just haven't thought too much about
So what do you think in your own sort of idea of what made Hotel 22 grow so specifically that specific short film much larger than you're saying of how you tried making another one that didn't grow as far. What elements do you think played a part? Was it like, for example, myself, I was able to connect with it because I can look at my own life. Do you think that played a part, or maybe the content that was in it, or how it was shot? Like, what do you think made that one grow above?
I've thought a lot about this too, and I think maybe it came out at a time when, well, maybe the issue, I mean, Silicon Valley on a surface level, probably Silicon Valley being perceived to be this super wealthy place, and then showing this like dark underside of it, the shock value there. Maybe that's easy to consume and seem relevant. And also, I think it's strange, but I think it's so simple in the story it's telling, in that I think there's like an elegance to it's not trying to say too much, but it somehow captures, I think, things that can be shocking but also ring very true to the darkness of reality, of how it is for people. And I'm not totally sure, but I think it's a very simple story, and it's a relevant one because it deals with issues that around the world that are probably
No,
pressing.
um,
Yeah, I don't know why.
no, that's
It's funny because making it, I never had the intention to reach a wide audience, and so I thought, by not having these the trappings that help you, the trappings like voiceover, interview, or even like overt characters, I I assume that kind of form doesn't necessarily isn't that accessible, but for some reason it's been really accessible to people, and I would love to. Yeah, I think it's cool, and it's like kind of beyond my intention that it was accessible,
yeah,
and
I
I
get
would
that very much so.
also.
Yeah, I do. I get exactly what you're saying. So do you
But
what
something I've discovered is that like audiences are much smarter than
that is led on to
they
believe?
are smart. They can observe so much and they get so much from you telling them very little.
No, that makes sense. And so, what sort of filmmakers or artists or whatever people, what has been your major inspirations with filmmaking?
Um, I can't say you can necessarily see it in my work, but I really love, like, well, of course, Frederick Weissman, who's an observational
Mm,
filmmaker. Um, I love a lot of narrative filmmakers like Kelly Reichardt
mm,
or Andrea Arnold, and when I'm shooting, I'm thinking about those kinds of films in my head. And filmmakers like, and these are filmmakers that I don't know whether they can inspire me because they're working at a level that's so incredible, but I just appreciate it
mm.
in like in awe. People like Kiarostami or Kurosawa.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a whole range, and also like the filmmakers behind like Leviathan from Harvard.
Mm.
Um, those I don't hope to emulate because I think I think what they do is really singular, but it's inspiring to see that kind of work being made in the documentary landscape.
So you sort of
It's film.
you're not trying to emulate, you're trying to sort of, I guess, learn from how they've approached different sort of film and how they approach subjects. Is that what you're sort of going with, or?
Or just, yeah, being inspired.
Mm.
I think just being inspired by the level of filmmaking.
Okay.
Yeah. Or, yeah, or just enjoying it so much that it inspires me to want to better myself as a filmmaker.
So
Not
almost
indirect.
you're inspired by their passion rather than their actual film work.
Or maybe their artistry.
Mm. That makes sense. No, I get that
Yeah.
very much so.
And the intelligence behind their filmmaking. Or like even like Kubrick.
Mm. Mm.
Like how do his stories work?
Mm.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I get that, especially
Yeah.
because when you like a lot of people, especially when I talk to, is they have favorite directors, favorite cinematographers, favorite writers, but they don't
Mhm.
necessarily reflect that in their work. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and so like someone
I
might
think.
be like an amazing comedic writer, but their
Mhm.
favorite things could be like a Kubrick film, and they've taken a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah,
elements from that, but because they take the inspiration of how he works, but not necessarily the content or the
yeah,
tone or whatnot.
yeah. Or
No,
like the British filmmaker Mike Leigh. I
okay,
love his films, and they're all fiction films. And I am not a fiction filmmaker, but I would love to make a film, like a nonfiction. I would love to make nonfiction films that achieve the level of filmmaking and impact that his fiction films do. And I don't know how to yet,
mm,
um, but yeah.
okay. And so, speaking of the fiction, were your initial sights on documentary filmmaking, or was it change? Like, did you change based on learning of documentaries and whatnot?
Yeah, yeah. So it was in. I went to Tisch NYU for undergrad, and going in, I think I had no idea of documentaries being even a thing because I grew up on all fiction films in Hong Kong, and and but I remember learning very quickly in undergrad that I did not enjoy working with actors, and I knew quickly
Yeah.
that there's no way that I would be able to make a living from working with actors. And then I took a class, a requirement that was a documentary class, and I loved the process of discovering real life. Like I had made a film about a zoo
Okay.
culture, like why we bring our kids to stare at animals,
Oh, that's very
and I
cool.
thought it was very strange. And then in the course of making this film at the Central Park Zoo, I found out through my research that the Central Park Zoo had housed a human African pygmy in the monkey house, and then he committed suicide after he was released. And so all the themes of that really spoke, like I care, like the intersection between racism and speciesism, discrimination based on species, all the patterns of discrimination that lead to this kind of destruction of a soul.
Mm.
Uh, it was so revelatory for me that I decided, and I really thrived in this nonfiction medium, that I decided, and where you're kind of more reactive than directive of reality or what's
Yeah.
happening in front of the camera. And then so slowly that was just kind of more and more what I did.
No, interesting. Yeah, because
Even though a lot of the films that inspired me are mostly fiction films,
yeah.
so I don't have the ability.
Yeah.
So all my nonfiction efforts striving to reach the work that I really love,
Okay.
but through the means that I don't necessarily have. Maybe.
No, that makes sense. Like for me, especially, is like documentary filmmaking is like it's scary for a filmmaker, especially because there's so much unknown with it going into it,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
especially like I love editing, but whenever I think about going out to film something, it's the sitting through and trying to find how can I make a story out of the things I filmed. And so, did you edit all your films? I didn't
I
check
did.
yet. So, when you're going through and editing Hotel 22 and Mother's Day and Bison Head, did you have a idea of what you wanted to show, or did you go in sort of going, all right, whatever's happening, if it's happening, or did you go in with specific things of what you wanted to show, or a bit of both?
I have going into the films. I have an idea of what I want to show. I think, but it's not. It's a very loose plan. It's a loose idea, and I usually hope I have a. I have. I imagine something, but I try to be really sensitive to what's happening so that I can be able to capture it and
Mm.
aware, so that I'm not blocking things out because of what I think the film will be. Like in the case of Bison Head, about the Ponderay Native American hunters, I had an expectation of what a hunt looked like, a tribal hunt looked like, and it didn't conform to that. You know, it takes they take place in SUVs. They're honking at
Mm.
the bison. There's not particularly much reverence in how bison are killed. But and I remember at the time being a little bit frustrated because it wasn't conforming to what I thought would be interesting. But in the end, I think that actually made it stronger because in subverting my own expectations, the film also subverts the audience's expectations of what it means to assert tribal identity or sovereignty today. Um, so I think it's almost best when you don't know what you're going out to get. I'm not totally sure about this. And I always hope that like the meaning kind of just comes out of the film. Or like with Hotel, but I am also very conscious structure. Like with Hotel 22, I knew that to build up to that really explosive moment where the guy called the man in the wheelchair racial epithet, I knew for that not to be so shocking that I had to build up to it. So the structure of the film, in my head at least, it begins really quiet, and then each scene that precedes this climax, what I think of as the climax scene, where
Definitely.
the guy gets yelled at, you're slowly introducing dialogue and conflict, so that by the time the climax comes, you're prepared for it emotionally, or at least tonally. And so I am cognizant of that, but I never planned that while shooting. I knew I wanted to film conflict because I witnessed that when I was doing research. Because I wanted, like, I was interested in public transportation as being vehicles where different classes are collide and are forced to collide in a way that they aren't necessarily in other spaces.
No, that makes sense. Well, when you said it's, I still when I was watching it, you sort of, I
Oh,
was caught off
okay,
guard.
bye.
It's all good. I was caught off guard completely in Hotel 22 by the climax. Like I was not, because
Oh no.
it, especially because you sort of assume based on how you react and the people you react in the world,
Mm-hmm.
you don't. It's almost sort of like a myth of how you think people react, especially in public spaces. But
Mm-hmm.
then, seeing that, I was honest. I was taken back quite significantly of just how some people, like, it could be just one guy who was doing it, but I don't know. And the
It
ability
happened
for
a lot.
having one
Yeah.
person to do that just so openly and confidently, I think I think that also pushed me a lot more into the direction of like, what can people what can homeless people do if even in direct lines of people being horrible, how can they really defend themselves on any platform?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean this precedes Trump getting elected,
Mm.
and all the sort of racial hatred that has come out of that. But this was before then, or before I think the media realized that that was happening all across the country. But yeah, it was shocking for me too. But a lot of people are also inebriated on that bus,
Mm.
and
Mm.
there's actually a lot of mental illness on that bus that the film doesn't go into. And I didn't want to go into it because I knew that I couldn't unpack or do justice to
Yeah.
the issue of mental illness
So
without alienating homeless people within a short.
no, that makes sense. And so how? So was there did you, so when the filmmaking, especially with Hotel 22 or other films, you just mentioned
Mm-hmm.
sort of there is a difference sort of what you show versus the reality. So how much
Yeah.
would you in your films sort of class, like, do you feel like most of your films still get the base reality? Obviously they get the base reality, but like how much do you think are sort of given and taken from how people let me reword this better. Sorry. Um, so having the camera there, especially, is people, because you're obviously filming during the situations, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how
Yeah.
much do you think from filming versus sitting there in reality, do you think people changed based on your reactions, based on how
Uh,
you were doing things?
oh, I'm sure. I'm sure people. I'm sure my camera influences the way people behave. But I also, so there's, I have two beliefs. I The films are heavily edited, and
Mm-hmm.
they are expressing my vision of what I want to say using reality that I've filmed and captured. They're expressing my worldview or what I think is important about what I've captured. There's a version of Hotel 22 that could have been about how there's a lot of compassion for the riders. Like there were really nice bus drivers who at some points they themselves had been homeless, and so they had a lot of empathy. Oh. But I chose to show the crueler drivers, or the more authoritarian drivers, or disciplinarian drivers. But so they're definitely very heavy, and to me, they are expressing a truth that I perceive. But of course, in any situation, there's not multiple truths, but multiple strands of things that you can critique and comment on. And so they're expressions of what I wanted to critique. And then in terms of like the camera influencing people, I think I know that the camera does influence people, but I also, this is probably the naive part of me, the idealistic part of me, I really believe that cameras capture, not the truth, but I think people can't hide themselves that much in front of cameras. Like they can change their performance, and it can catalyze them to maybe that guy wouldn't have yelled the racial epithet if I hadn't been there, because moments before that scene he was yelling at me.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so, and I cut that out. But I had also ridden the bus many times before actual production, because I wanted to see how people reacted to I just want to observe, and then I slowly brought on bigger and bigger cameras, like a small DSLR, and then to see how people react to being filmed. And I noticed there's not that much of a difference between a small camera and a huge camera, because once you have a camera, everyone understands they're being filmed. And also their behavior, I think people on that bus were dealing with so much more than a self-consciousness of being filmed. They had so much bigger problems. And so they were very aware that I was filming them, but probably some of them, it didn't change their behavior. And for some of them, it probably did. So it's all, yeah. But I still think even if they are influenced by the camera, I still think it's revealing of something.
Definitely.
Because we're constantly performing for each other. Yeah.
And even if I guess it's sort of an interesting thing. It was like, even if they're not going to be acting the same, it still reveals something about their character as well.
Yeah.
And so this might be a boring question, I don't know. But how did you initially start? So did you have to get how did you get permission to film people on a bus? So personally as well. Did you ask? Or
yeah, so I got a permit from the bus company as a student. So that's how I did it.
Okay. So it's just...
But I had no idea that it would become like kind of more official because it was on the New York Times. And had I said that, it's going to have this huge audience, maybe I wouldn't have been able to get out.
No, I get that.
But I hadn't been able to fit that kind of place.
No, I get that tactic. I've definitely been filming out in public, and someone's come up to me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm filming a school project," and no questions are asked after that.
I know. Sometimes I think the student project thing is a great. Right now, like I need to, yeah, like for as long as I can milk it. Just kidding.
Like 67. No, I'm doing a school project. Don't worry, guys.
Yeah. I'm back in grad school. Yeah. Forever.
Yeah. Try and milk it forever. Who needs permits anyway?
Yeah.
But especially some of the shots, it seemed very personal. I obviously don't know like how much you zoomed or whatnot, but the shots of just someone sleeping on a bus, and it seemed very close to them. Did people have any sort of reactions initially? Just really like, get the camera away from me, or was it sort of just everyone was just sort of like,
Yeah, I was very close to people. Like sometimes I would be this close to people. And I did that because I wanted the immediacy and the access of feeling like you were right there. And I knew a zoom lens wouldn't be able to capture that. There were, of course, every night I was yelled at someone, usually someone who was drunk.
Mm.
But because I had relationships with either the regular homeless people who were always on the bus who knew me, or the bus drivers or the security guards, people would defend me because they knew what I was doing. And if someone yelled at me, of course I would be. So I would kind of gauge who would tolerate me and who wouldn't in terms of how close I got. And of course, there's something a little ruthless about getting into someone's personal space like this close. But I kind of made constant social and emotional calculations in my head about how close I could get and how invasive it was to them, and whether it was having a negative effect on them or no effect. And then I would back off or get closer depending on what I was okay for them, for the people in front of the camera.
No, yeah. So you okay? So you there was like, okay, because the film doesn't, like, I when I was reading up on it, it said you'd filmed over 2 weeks, but like, I guess especially
1 week.
Or was 1 week, sorry. But you had established relationships prior, so bus drivers knew you, the security guards, the regulars, like homeless people who were riding the bus also knew you.
Some of them.
Some of them. And so, I wasn't expecting. So for some reason I wasn't expecting that. I was almost like, because I guess you would need that to actually be able to do the.
Oh yeah. If I had just shown up with all my gear with a tripod and sandbag,
having
and someone was like, yeah, I mean, maybe it would have worked, but then when I would get yelled at, like, come to my defense, and also, yeah, it's nice to see familiar faces, and like with the people that I had known from before, from my research scouting exercises, then I could get close to them and get those invasive shots because there's some kind of social contract between us for having known each other.
Interesting. And what was I going to say? So, was it hard for you not to interfere with certain things? So, especially when people were yelling at each other, was it because there is a moral question with documentary filmmaking? Is that what level as a human do you and a filmmaker do you have to interfere? So when someone is doing something that's overtly wrong, to what extent can you interfere with it without interfering essentially what you're trying to make? So did you find it difficult to sort of try and separate yourself from the world around you to try and create something for a larger message?
I remember, at least, it is a strategy where I do steel myself a lot, like steel myself against interfering if I believe that the harm that's being done is temporary and not so deep that it'll have long-term consequences. And I do have a lot of restraint about whether or not to step in. And usually I will be horrified inside about what's happening. I'll document it, and then after it's passed, then I try to step in to be a human being again, in a way. Like, I'll comfort the person who was just yelled at or something, or like be in solidarity with the person who was victimized. But if it's not physical harm, maybe it's arbitrary, but for me, like, I draw the line at like corporeal violations. Like, if someone is physically being harmed, I would step in. But if it's just an emotional harming, for me, and this is obviously totally arbitrary, I feel that it's not necessarily my place to step in. Or it's funny because right now I'm working on film, and it's about, and if I think the person has a capacity to defend themselves, then I won't step in. And usually in a context like the public bus, there were other people who would step in. And I knew that. But the film I'm working on right now, which is about, it follows stray dogs in Turkey as they overhear human conversations and tapestry of overheard conversations.
Wow, that's a very unique.
You get a sense of what Turkey's going through.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, but so with dogs, it it was this ethical dilemma. It came up much more because the dogs were sometimes in situations where they really were helpless, like if they really got rounded up by the government, or if a dog was getting mauled by another dog. In those situations, I would step in, because if a dog is getting mauled by another dog, the dog is going to die or develop an infection, and there's long-term consequences. So I would sacrifice the shot for the film to be an ethical human being. And I think it would be the same if it were like a human who was getting brutally attacked. But I haven't been in those situations.
No.
But I have a line, which is just the physical line.
Yeah, that's yeah. Because I've definitely had many conversations with people about where is the line of where it's the greater good versus the immediate impact.
What do people say, or what have people tended to say?
Sorry, what was that?
What have people tended to say?
Well, it varies. I think a lot of the younger the person, they're generally more, I guess, more like, oh, you just step in no matter what. And especially because I remember having this in university, we had this long form sort of discussion about it, and especially the disconnection between, for example, that if they saw someone on the street and they were filming reaction street, that would be more helpful to stand in, but with the connection to war. So if someone saw someone who was potentially warning someone about a bomb explosion or whatnot, they're less likely. They said, oh no, war's different to like on the street. However, it's still a life and a life being taken.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's weird. The distinction. That war somehow creates different moral rules.
Yes. And animals especially is sort of like it's because of like, I guess, the David Attenborough documentaries and a lot of that. There's if you see an animal getting killed in the wild, it's fine. Like that's fine. They were adamant like that's fine because that's just the wildlife and whatnot. And I like, for example, I don't think it's something that you can truly pinpoint until you're exactly in that environment, until I guess your fight and flight instincts kick in. But certainly, I think a big rule is for me. But I guess with, like you said, with the emotional thing would be, would me being there impact the situation from which direction? For example, if my place in this film has caused this person to do this, well, obviously it's my responsibility to fix the situation.
Yeah.
But then, what do I do if my impact has no impact on the situation? If this situation was going to occur no matter what, I was going to be here or not, what is my role? Am I here to save the person, or am I here to film what happens in this place?
Yeah, I feel like people have a responsibility, because I've seen film, it's unfolding, and I'm like, wow, the step in and change this person's life, or prevent this kid from making a great. And for me, when I watch that stuff, I think that filmmaker has betrayed the subject in a way that's not excusable, because like I think it's important to stay objective with your subject. Betraying them in the film representation of them is different than betraying them in life. And I feel like when you have a relationship with your subject, I think you have to be like a good person.
It's
like
very
like with the dogs. Like I think at one point one of the dogs had become so emboldened because out with stray dogs so much that he became kind of a nuisance in this town, and then so he gets rounded up. And we could have just left it, but because I felt I was partly responsible, and also because he had been this, willing kind of subject in our film, I felt on a personal level that I had to step in to save the dog because of a relationship that we had. And otherwise you're just a really cold person. Yeah,
there's it's very
but
hard
it's the stakes. I think it all depends on the stakes. Like if someone is really about to ruin their lives and they've been your subject, and them ruining their lives would be better for your film, like I don't think it's worth it. But at the same time, I am obviously a little bit of a person because I didn't step in when that guy was, the guy chair on the bus. But that's because I don't think the stakes are as high as other situations.
And then you have things like the Howard Stern show where they encourage people to make bad mistakes, and um, and so with your films, criticism is obviously a major part of filmmaking. And so how do you sort of respond or engage with criticism? Because because there's multiple platforms, especially for you. Like someone who's a YouTuber will receive criticism on YouTube, where as you've gone through the film film festivals, you've gone through OpDocs, YouTube, multiple platforms, Reddit. How do you, on like a scale, sort of interact and engage with criticism?
I'm very open to it, and especially if it comes from people that I respect. I take their note, and it might influence me with another film that I make. But at the same time, I've kind of also learned, because I'm so open, I've also learned over time to also appreciate what's working about a film, to be confident in what is good about a film. Like people have had criticisms about Hotel 22, about its length, about the stuff, anything, and I've taken those to heart. But over the last few years, I've also, Hotel 22 was the way it was, a certain type of audience or a certain scale of audience because of the way it, maybe at the sacrifice or expense of other things. And those are choices that were made. At the time, I didn't know, and I think it's fine. So I'm very, I'm very open to it. But I've also learned to balance that openness with some reserve, to know that I know what I'm doing as a filmmaker. And it's funny, like the first time Hotel 22, I think it was in Germany at Doc Leipzig, and someone asked, and this is my first, almost my first festival experience. At the Q&A, they asked, like, why wasn't this a character-driven film? Like, why didn't you unpack the lives of the people on the bus? And I had a reason, but I was caught off guard, and so I just said something like, "Yeah, maybe it could have been a better film had I followed the lives of less people." But then that's not what you're supposed to answer, and also true necessarily. And so I learned from that. I was like, so what? Why did I? So after that Q&A experience, I asked myself, like, why did I choose not to follow these people? And then I articulated an answer to myself, and then presented that.
So
in
what
the future. But that kind of questioning made me realize you can't just be like, yep, any other way it could be a better film, which was my initial response, because I think I'm a pretty humble person, an open person, but that's something I've learned. Yeah, that you have to be able to defend yourself too.
No, definitely them. Yeah. And so ultimately, I guess, because what was your answer that you've sort of reevaluated on?
Yeah. Well, personally, I've always had problems with documentaries that think they can, especially short documentaries, that think they can tell a person's life story through like a Frankenbitten interview where it's explaining their whole history. And like I talked to a lot of these homeless writers, and I found out about their stories, which were really interesting. Like one guy was a Vietnam vet. Another guy, his kids didn't know he was homeless. Another person had been waiting for public housing for 6 years. All these fascinating details, but to try to unpack or say something about someone's life with a short film felt like you were not doing their life and all the complexities justice. Like to include their life details would almost be to say, oh, these are the life steps that happened to them which led to their homelessness, which almost felt like it would be blaming them for their current state rather than all the societal and economic things that are creating this problem as well as the personal. And then also, I think personally, I'm just not as drawn to character-driven studies. I was more drawn to examinations of space, even having the bus be an inanimate character. Yeah, I think those were some of my answers. And also I wanted people to, like, by not having anyone tell me their life story, or get too involved with a single person, that it became more of a study of a social fabric, which is what I was interested in anyway, collisions, interactions, uh, presenting, foregrounding that more rather than an individual life story that may or may not be worth.
No, I get what you're saying.
Everyone's life is worth exploring, but
Yeah,
yeah,
because I've watched a lot of documentaries, especially on homeless thing, and like a majority of them use sort of testimonial, or like
yeah,
people sort of talking about it. And I think sort of what makes Hotel 22 different to a lot of the other ones is that they connect you, yes, on an emotional level with that person, and it's a clear message expressed because they're telling you exactly. But with Hotel 22, it was how it felt to ride line 22, how it felt to be in that environment, how it felt to be
yeah.
there, rather than what those people think.
And I think that kind of, that's perfectly stated. Like, and I think that kind of empathy is more, at least for me, I think that's more effective and impactful than me identifying with this single person. And I actually think when films tend to just like spew out the life story beats of a person, it can be really alienating. Like, if I don't relate to those life story beats, but you can relate to just a human body, like, being
Mm,
on a rumbling bus, and feeling that feeling of the, like, a violation of your sleep.
mm,
Like, that is something that's relatable, and I felt like life story details might actually decrease your ability to empathize.
because there's almost like an honesty with less, almost, because like for example when you watch documentaries and people talking about their lives and stuff, it's coming from a perspective,
Yeah,
in a very specific perspective, and that
yeah,
perspective is very interesting and enlightening, but you don't know what is being left out, and you don't know what's being left in.
yeah,
And I guess the same thing can be said about editing with Hotel 22, but having less sort of people talking and interfering with the filmmaking, I guess, sort of gives a
yeah,
more, I guess, initial honest look into how it feels, and it makes it, the content seems more honest towards the viewer, because that's what it felt for me. Because if
yeah,
like seeing someone without having any emotional connections like yell at someone else on the bus versus someone who is like, oh, I got yelled at on the bus, where you're like, well, why were you yelled at? Or you immediately start questioning that person. But when you
yeah,
just see
yeah,
it and just bluntly as if you were there, there's a much more emotional kick to it.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Yeah, the goal of the film, it was not to impact why this crisis is happening or why it's happening to these people. It was just spend a night on this bus in nine minutes and imagine what that's like. Almost, I see it as a human rights violation that all these,
Mm.
a lot of them are senior people subjected to this kind of physical
Mm.
physicality of being on a bus and attempting to sleep on it. And for them, it's years. For the audience, it's 9 minutes. Cinematic time works different.
Mm. And so, what would you say would be your most sort of or what was the most satisfactory, or not, sorry, oh, wrong word. What's been the most fulfilling film to make? So there's been like, you've obviously had different success with different films, but what has been the one that you're like, yes, this has been the most satisfying film to create?
Um, I would say my relationships, my film, uh, rejection and then acceptance and then all these phases. Like, I used to hate Bison Head, now but I think the film that is meaning the most to me right now is the film I'm working on right now about the stray dogs in Turkey, because it's truly like a crazy passion project, because I love dogs, and I see the continuity in the themes, like marginalization, but here this pushing the idea of marginalization to an even more extreme form, I think, than homelessness or different subgroups within a civilization. Uh, and I'm really thrilled because I think it's a bit more obscure probably than human interest stories, but to me, like I was saying, like the mental shifts that I aspire towards as a filmmaker, the mental shifts I hope to create in audiences. For me, I see the world in a particular way, and this Stray Dog project is me truly trying to attempt to convince other people to see it the way I see it.
And so,
Because this is a much more obscure uh, vehicle, probably a much yeah.
and so
So it's
what?
a much bigger challenge.
So what initially got you to do uh, this film in Turkey? What sort of initially got your ideas about it? Did you go to travel to Turkey before, or what was the?
No, I didn't. So the initial concept. So I had a dog growing up, which actually you can see in the back
Yep.
in the portrait. So that was my dog growing up, and he was it was like he was the love of my life, and yet when he died, I found myself on. I could tell my heart was responding, shaped and corrupted by external societal cues that were telling me it's a dog who died. It's not the same as another family member, even though I knew I loved him a lot. And so to have that kind of political societal hierarchy corrupt something as personal as like my ability, my heart, was really interesting to me. And so I decided I wanted to explore hierarchy and sentience and what is value through stray dogs around the world, study of the way stray dogs are treated, because they can occupy different stations in life, much like all the populations I've made films about in my other short films. But then Turkey was my first stop, and it was just so dynamic there. And they have such an interesting relationship to stray animals, where the society or the government is really capable of getting rid of all stray dogs to make Istanbul or other cities look more like Paris or London, where we've eradicated all of them in the name of like a civilized urban life. But they've chosen not to because of, I think, the will of the people and the value they see in having other life be able to occupy their streets freely, which I think is really beautiful. And I think Turkey is one of the few places that really does that consciously. It's a conscious choice, not in the way that maybe other developing countries have.
No, I think it's a very interesting point, especially with how we connect with animals. Because like my dog died probably, I think, just a month ago, and so I know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I know. I definitely understand what you're saying, especially.
Were you in college when it happened?
Yeah.
So were you at home?
I was at home. Yeah.
Oh, you were.
Yeah, and so it was sort of weird because because then it sort of brings into it sort of does you do sort of question a little bit more about it in terms of sort of, because it was sort of like, oh, he had lung cancer and it was very hard for him to breathe, and so it's like, oh, we gonna put him down, and it's very hard, and it's because you sort of think of like, oh, initially it's like, oh, animals injured, put it down, but when it's a very connected sort of thing to you, you're sort of like, well, I don't know anymore. And because you're just like, I love this thing so much, and you don't want it to go or something along those lines. And then
so I made it. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and and what you said, it's like sort of like you're being told to sort of like, it's a dog, it's not a part of your family. It's the emotional connection. It does resonate, and I think a lot of people can resonate with that, even with what happens, because many people do experience it, and like dogs are family essentially, and how people treat them. And
actually, one of the short films I had made before was about exactly what you're talking about, pet euthanasia, how it's perceived to be euthanizing your pet the moment it's sick is perceived to be the norm in a way that we would never do that with humans. And I had profiled this place that believed in animal hospicing animals to the point where they pass on their own in the same way that you would with humans, because this place believed that animals have the same will to live as people. Or like, even if euthanasia in certain states, that when it comes down to it, only like 2% of people really would say, yeah, my life is over.
Yeah.
So so applying that human impulse to even at the very, very tail end of your life, want to give to animals. That kind of respect. So yeah, it's interesting
No, I
and
understand.
hard.
Yeah, because like I think
And the status quo, yeah, is telling you something different.
because I guess there's also a level of sort of like you don't know what the dog wants sort of thing. Because like
Yeah.
if a person like for example,
Mm-hmm.
grandfather had Alzheimer's, and he definitely
Mm-hmm.
was just like I'm gonna get to a point where I'm gonna be done,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to be able to say when I can go and when I'm not to go. Um,
Yes.
but was the dog, it's much more difficult because it's sort of like people. It's sort of weird for me because I'm like I'm okay with my grandfather saying, oh okay, I know when it's fine to go, and that's sort of socially not. But then with a dog, I'm like I don't know anymore because they don't have a say.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a place when pets should be euthanized because they're in severe pain. Like, imagine where pets are euthanized before their time is up. Like, imagine being that dog, and they're like, "No, I'm good.
I'm
I don't
good.
need to die right now." Like,
It's like, have you seen?
how horrifying!
It's like the Monty Python. Have you seen Monty Python?
I have, but I don't remember.
Oh, it's because there's a scene of basically they've got a cart of like bringing out the dead for the Black Death, and they bring out this one old man. He's just like, all right, here you go, and he's like, I'm not dead yet. He's like, oh, you'll be dead soon
Yeah,
enough. Here you go. And then he's like, oh, I'm not dead. I feel like I'm getting better. And
that's funny, but yeah,
it's
exactly. And you're doing that to your loved one.
yeah, and it's just there is I think there is a moral question of it just I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I don't think I have an answer for it, and I don't think I ever truly will have a definite answer, but it's still something that I have to that everyone should really
Yeah,
question.
yeah. It
And
was just to reframe pet euthanasia as a last.
mm, yeah, last resort over first, yeah. And I think I'll just end. Last question: if you had an unlimited budget, unlimited resources, unlimited sort of production time or whatnot, what would be a project that you would undertake? If you could, if you could sort of, and no, this might be a bit of an open question. It might be a little bit sort of naive, I guess. But if you had the opportunity to create anything, what would you create?
Oh, I mean, this is just on my mind right now, probably because I'm working on it. I really think, like this stray dog film I'm working on. Obviously, I'm like a little bit obsessed with dogs because I have ideas that are all related to dogs that would fit into your question.
Yep.
But like, I think this film would be like a masterpiece if this film took place over 10 years and you traced the lives of these dogs and saw them from youth to death
Wow.
within a 90-minute film, like them living their lives on the streets, or even a dog in a house 10 years. Yeah,
No,
they're
that's
like,
no, that's
like,
actually no. I get what you're
yeah.
saying. It's sort of like
Can you imagine?
it's like the Boyhood for dogs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope nobody steals this amazing idea. That will take 10 years to make.
It's like where you got 9 years down the line and someone else is like, oh, we've got an 11-year movie. I'm going to be only doing 10 and that's going to come out in another year. Oh, damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm copywriting this idea
Yeah.
here in this blog space.
Yep.
My
No.
brilliant multi-million-dollar endless time
Dogs.
idea.
No, I definitely. This is gonna be people chomping at the bit for this one.
Yeah. Probably would not be able to get funding for this one, but I think it would be amazing.
Yeah. No, I can actually see that. I think you could create something very. No, I can actually see. I like.
Imagine the pathos, seeing an entire life unfold in front of you, truly unfold because it's not fiction. 90 minutes.
Yeah, you look at like especially like major movies that sort of do similar things to that. Like you look at like what Marley and Me, an Australian movie Red Dog, which is almost very similar in terms.
Oh really? Oh, I don't know these. Are they not good?
of. Marley and Me. Oh my goodness.
Marley and Me, the one with Jennifer Aniston.
Yeah, Jennifer Aniston and what's his name? I can't remember. But it was following like a Labrador, and it sort of got from puppy to death.
Right. Yeah,
And
it wouldn't be like that. It wouldn't be like that.
No, it wouldn't be like that where it's like, slap on the knee funny every time, but then the dog dies and it's the saddest thing in the world.
Yeah,
It was genuinely sad.
but imagine a dog
What was that? Sorry, you cut out that one.
I was gonna say, like, imagine living just a dog life that to love. And this is where I think character-driven storytelling would be really effective. And also, it would be asking empathy for different. I mean, obviously, dogs are easy, but to see that life, see it in a total light to you. I probably shouldn't go on too much about.
No. I think I like. So you're sort of saying with like characterization, it's sort of like in a way that it's good to characterize animals because it sort of humifies. Yeah.
In this instance, because there's already this rift.
Yeah. Alrighty, and so I think on that point, on the sad dog death
You're like,
point,
I'm out.
well, it's. I'm just gonna go look at pictures of my dog and remember the old time. No.
Sorry about your dog.
Nah, it's all good. And it's the work. I think the hardest thing is the sort of like you walk down, sort of every time you sort of expect to see him, sort of outside or on his bed or something like that. You're like, oh no, he's not there anymore. I think that's the hardest part. Is sort of you just always sort of expect him to be around. But anyway, on a good note, thank you so much for
Thank you for telling me about like what you said about how it even changed the way you see the environment in Australia. That was
no problem. I think a lot of people, especially watching your film, could say the same, because it immediately I just had the immediate effect of how I perceive things around me, because I guess it made me feel connected to what was happening on line 22. And so thank you again.
Where do you live?
I live in Australia, Brisbane.
Oh, okay.
So in sort of north of Sydney and Melbourne. And so thank you so much, Elizabeth Lowe.
Yeah, thank you.
Can people where could people follow you or connect with your work or?
I have an Instagram. It's Liz Boking, LizBoking. And then I also have a website, www.elizabeth-lowe.
Awesome.
Where all my work.
So if you're listening, radio, follow them, or if you're on the YouTube, links are going to be always down below. Anyway, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.